The impossible request, the great assembly hall of the Galactic Trade Council had never seen such chaos. Representatives from 47 different species argued, clicked, whistled, and roared at each other in a cacophony of languages that even the universal translators struggled to process. At the center of the massive crystalline chamber, a holographic display showed the grim reality that had brought them all together. Red markers dotted the star charts like a spreading disease. Each one represented a merchant vessel that had vanished in the past 6 months. Cargo ships, passenger liners, even heavily armed escort cruisers had simply disappeared without a trace in the outer rim sectors. The only clue left behind was the same haunting energy signature that scientists had dubbed the Void Wraith phenomenon. Ambassador Zixathala, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic rainbows, called for order with a harmonic chime that cut through the noise. As the elected speaker for this emergency session, her normally calm demeanor showed cracks of stress that revealed the purple veins beneath her transparent skin. "Fellow beings," she began, her voice carrying the musical quality of her species, "we have gathered here because our traditional methods have failed. 3 separate battle fleets, each numbering over 50 vessels, have engaged these void wraiths. None have returned." Captain Morgath of the Saurian Defense Corps stood on his massive hind legs, his scaled hide bristling with agitation. At nearly 3 meters tall, he commanded attention even in this diverse assembly. "Speaker Zixathala speaks truth, but she understates our losses. The hegemony sent their finest dreadnoughts. The Epsilon Collective deployed their newest phase shift, technology. My own people contributed our most experienced warriors, all consumed by these phantom attackers." A collective shudder ran through the assembly. The Saurians were known throughout the galaxy for their military prowess. If their warriors had fallen, what hope did anyone have? "Perhaps," suggested Ambassador Quellis of the Ethereal Communion, her gaseous form shifting colors to indicate deep thought, "we should consider evacuation of the affected sectors, cut our losses, and establish new trade routes." "Abandon 3 entire sectors?" Morgath's voice carried a growl that made several smaller species step back. "Those regions contained 17 inhabited worlds and the primary shipping lanes for industrial materials. The economic impact would destabilize half the galaxy." "Better economic instability than total annihilation," Quellis replied, her form flickering with nervous energy. As the debate raged on, a small chime indicated someone had requested to address the assembly. All eyes turned to the human section, where a single figure stood waiting patiently. Commander Sarah Chen looked remarkably unremarkable compared to the exotic aliens surrounding her. Average height, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, wearing the simple blue uniform of the human merchant marine. She might have been invisible, if not for the quiet confidence in her posture. "The human delegation recognizes Commander Chen of the merchant vessel Persistence," Zixathala announced, though her tone suggested surprise at the interruption. Sarah stepped forward, her boots clicking softly on the crystal floor. Around her, beings who could crush starships with their bare hands or manipulate reality with their thoughts watched with barely concealed amusement. Humans had been part of the Galactic Trade Council for only 15 years, making them the newest and, in many eyes, least significant members. "Honored delegates," Sarah began, her voice steady despite speaking to beings who could buy and sell entire star systems. "I've listened to your debates, and I understand your frustration. You've tried overwhelming force, you've tried advanced technology, you've tried coordinated military strategy. All have failed." "Indeed," Morgath rumbled, "which is why we must consider more extreme measures. Perhaps a focused antimatter bombardment of the entire region. Or," Sarah continued as if she hadn't been interrupted, "you could try something different. Something no one has attempted yet." Quellis's gaseous form rippled with what might have been laughter. "Young human, no disrespect intended. But what could your people possibly offer that our combined civilizations have not already tried? Your species has been in space for barely a century." Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made the chamber grow quiet. "Exactly. We haven't been in space long enough to know what's impossible." She gestured to the holographic display, and the star chart zoomed in on the affected region. Every fleet you've sent has approached this problem as a military engagement. Weapons hot, shields up, ready for battle. But what if these void wraiths aren't attackers? What if there's something else entirely? Preposterous, Morgeth snorted. They have destroyed dozens of vessels. The evidence is clear. The evidence is that ships have disappeared, Sarah corrected gently. That's not the same thing as being destroyed. In all these encounters, has anyone tried to communicate with them? A long silence filled the chamber. Ambassador Zixathala's form cycled through several colors as she processed this question. The energy signatures suggest non-biological entities. Artificial constructs, perhaps. Standard communication protocols would be ineffective. Standard protocols, yes, Sarah agreed. But humans have a saying, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. You've been approaching this with military hammers. Maybe it's time to try a different tool. And what exactly are you proposing? Quellis asked, her tone skeptical but curious. Sarah took a deep breath. Give me one ship. Just mine. The Persistence. Let me try something different. The chamber erupted in chaos again. Voices raised in every language imaginable, translators working overtime to convey concepts ranging from insane to suicidal to completely impossible. Morgeth's roar silenced them all. Human, do you understand what you're asking? You would take a single cargo vessel against entities that have defeated our greatest warships. This is madness. Maybe, Sarah admitted. But your way isn't working. My ship isn't a warship. We carry medical supplies, agricultural equipment, educational materials. We're not a threat. Maybe that's exactly what we need to be. Even if your reasoning had merit, Zixathala said carefully, the Persistence is a civilian vessel. We cannot ask you to sacrifice yourself on such a slim possibility. You're not asking, Sarah replied firmly. I'm volunteering. My crew is willing. We've discussed it, and we believe this is worth trying. Your crew? Morgeth looked puzzled. How many warriors do you command? 12, Sarah said simply. A pilot, an engineer, a medic, a communications specialist, and 8 cargo handlers. Not a warrior among us. The silence that followed was deafening. The idea that 12 untrained civilians in a cargo ship could succeed where thousands of trained soldiers had failed seemed beyond absurd. Finally, Zixathala spoke. Commander Chen, while we appreciate your courage, we cannot in good conscience send you to certain death. The Council has a responsibility to protect all member species. Sarah's expression didn't change. With respect, Ambassador, you're already sending people to certain death. Every merchant who enters those sectors, every passenger on a liner, every military crew you dispatch. At least let me try something different before you write off those entire regions. She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled representatives. What's the worst that could happen? You lose one small cargo ship instead of another battle fleet. You're already planning to abandon those sectors anyway. The human makes a valid point, admitted Counselor Vexton of the Synthetic Collective, his mechanical voice cutting through the tension. The statistical probability of success for conventional approaches has proven to be effectively 0. An unconventional approach, even with low probability of success, represents an improvement in odds. You're talking about probability, Morgeth growled. I'm talking about the lives of 12 beings. And I'm talking about the lives of millions, Sarah countered. Everyone in those sectors who's trapped, everyone who depends on those trade routes, everyone who will suffer if we just abandon entire star systems because we can't figure out what's happening. Ambassador Zixathala's form shifted through several colors as she considered. Around the chamber, delegates whispered among themselves in a dozen different ways. Finally, she called for order. The human proposal is yet unprecedented, she said carefully. However, our current situation is also unprecedented. If Commander Chen is truly willing to volunteer for this mission, and if her crew consents, perhaps we should consider it. Consider it? Quellis's gaseous form flared bright yellow with agitation. We're discussing sending 12 beings to their deaths based on a theory that these entities might be friendly. This goes against every principle of the Trade Council. Every principle except the most important one, Sarah said quietly. The principle that we don't abandon our own. Those sectors aren't empty space on a map. They're home to millions of beings who are counting on us to find a solution. Morgeth studied the human commander with new interest. Despite her small size and unremarkable appearance, there was something about her that reminded him of the greatest warriors he had known. Not the strength of arm or sharpness of claw, but the quiet courage that faced impossible odds without flinching. If you do this, he said slowly, how do you plan to communicate with entities that have shown no interest in communication? Sarah's smile returned, and this time it held a hint of mischief. That's where being human comes in handy. We're very good at talking to things that don't want to talk back. We've had thousands of years of practice. And if they attack you immediately, then you'll know they're hostile, and you can proceed with your antimatter bombardment plan with a clear conscience. But if they don't attack immediately, if there's even a moment's hesitation, then maybe, just maybe, we can figure out what they really want. The chamber fell quiet again as delegates considered this. The logic, while unorthodox, was sound. If the Void Wraiths were truly hostile entities bent on destruction, one more lost ship wouldn't change anything. But if there was even a possibility that they could be reasoned with, the potential benefits were enormous. The Persistence would need escorts, Morgeth said finally. Ships standing by in case— No, Sarah interrupted firmly. No escorts, no backup fleet lurking at the edge of the system. If I'm right about this, any show of force will ruin everything. It has to be just us, alone, showing that we come in. Peace. That is suicide, Quellis stated flatly. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged. But sometimes the only way to prove you're not a threat is to make yourself completely vulnerable. Ambassador Zix Thala's crystalline form had cycled through nearly every color in her species' emotional spectrum. Commander Chen, are you absolutely certain about this course of action? Once you enter Void Wraith territory, we may not be able to help you. I understand, Sarah replied. But I also understand that doing nothing isn't really an option. Not for those sectors, not for the people trapped there, and not for the future of interstellar commerce. She looked around the chamber, one more time. Give me a chance, give humanity a chance to try something different. Maybe we'll fail, but at least we'll fail trying something new instead of repeating the same mistakes. The vote, when it finally came, was close. 24 delegates voted in favor of allowing the mission, 21 voted against, and 2 abstained. It was barely a majority, but it was enough. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Morgeth approached Sarah. Up close, his massive frame made her look even smaller, but she didn't back down from his intense stare. Human, he said quietly. I have fought in 17 major battles and survived encounters that killed thousands of warriors. I say this with respect. What you are planning is the bravest or most foolish thing I have ever witnessed. Maybe both, Sarah admitted. But someone has to try. Morgeth extended one clawed hand and Sarah shook it without hesitation. If you succeed, he rumbled, the Saurian Defense Corps will sing songs of your courage for 1,000 years. And if I fail, then we will sing songs of your courage for 10,000 years. As Sarah left the great assembly hall, she carried with her the hopes, fears, and doubts of 47 different species. In 72 hours, she would take her small cargo ship into the unknown, armed with nothing but human stubbornness and the belief that sometimes the smallest voice can carry the most important message. The Persistence was ready. Her crew was ready. Now they just had to hope that the universe was ready for a different kind of first contact. The Human Solution. 3 days later, Commander Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the Persistence, watching the swirling colors of hyperspace stream past the viewports. In normal circumstances, the sight never failed to fill her with wonder. Today it felt like watching the countdown to either humanity's greatest triumph or its most spectacular failure. Dropping out of hyperspace in 30 seconds, announced Lieutenant Torres from the pilot station. Maria Torres had been with Sarah for 8 years. through cargo runs to the edge of known space and diplomatic missions to first contact worlds. Her steady hands and unflappable nature had gotten them out of more tight spots than Sarah cared to count. "All stations, report status," Sarah called out. "Engineering reports all systems nominal," came the voice of Chief Yamamoto over the comm. "Engines purring like a contented cat." "Communications array is fully operational," reported Ensign Okafor from her station. "All frequencies open and ready. Medical bay is prepared for any contingency," added Dr. Reyes, though they all knew that if the Void Wraiths were truly hostile, medical attention would be the least of their concerns. Sarah looked around the small bridge at her crew. 12 people who had volunteered to fly into the unknown, based on nothing more than her theory and their faith in her judgment. They deserved better than a commander who was making educated guesses, but they were about to find out if educated guesses were enough. "Hyperspace dropout in 10 seconds, Torres announced. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mark." The swirling colors vanished, replaced by the familiar star field of normal space. But this wasn't just any star field. This was the Kepler 442 system, right in the heart of Void Wraith territory. According to the records, 17 ships had vanished in this system alone. "Passive sensors only," Sarah ordered. "I want to see what's out there before we announce ourselves." For several minutes, the bridge was quiet except for the soft beeping of instruments. Then Okafor's voice cut through the silence. "Commander, I'm picking up energy signatures. Multiple contacts, bearing everywhere." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. On screen, the main view screen lit up with the tactical display, and Sarah heard several sharp intakes of breath around the bridge. Dozens of contacts surrounded them, moving in patterns that seemed almost organic despite their obviously artificial nature. The ships, if they could be called ships, defied easy description. They seemed to be made of shadow and starlight, constantly shifting between solid matter and energy. "Those are them," Torres whispered. "The Void Wraiths." As they watched, the mysterious vessels began to move closer, forming what looked suspiciously like an attack formation. Every instinct Sarah had developed in 15 years of space travel screamed at her to raise shields and prepare for combat. Instead, she took a deep breath and said, "Okafor, open all communication channels. All frequencies, all protocols." "Ma'am, they're closing in fast," Torres reported, her voice tight with controlled fear. "Weapons range in 30 seconds. "Steady," Sarah said, surprised by how calm her own voice sounded. "Okafor, are the channels open?" "All channels open, Commander, but I'm not detecting any response to standard hailing frequencies." Sarah nodded. She had expected as much. "Then we try something different. Patch me through to the external broadcasters." "You're live, Commander." Sarah stepped forward, addressing the view screen as if she could see whoever or whatever was controlling the approaching vessels. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the human vessel Persistence. We are not armed. We are not here to fight. We come seeking understanding." The Void Wraith ships continued their approach, but something in their movement seemed different, less aggressive, more curious. "We know you have encountered our people before," Sarah continued. "Ships have disappeared in your territory. We don't know why, but we want to understand. We want to help." Still no response, but the approaching vessels had slowed their advance. Sarah felt a spark of hope. "Okafor, start broadcasting mathematical sequences, prime numbers, then the Fibonacci sequence. After that, try musical scales." "Musical scales?" Okafor looked puzzled but began entering commands. "Any particular type?" "All of them. Human scales, alien scales, even whale songs from Earth. Anything that shows pattern and intelligence." The bridge filled with the soft sound of mathematics and music being broadcast into space. Prime numbers ticked by in precise digital pulses, followed by the elegant curve of Fibonacci progression. Then came the haunting notes of a human piano playing a simple melody, followed by the crystalline harmonics of Zixthala's people and the deep resonant calls of Earth's whales. For a moment, nothing happened. The Void Wraith vessels continued their slow approach, now close enough that Sarah could see details in their impossible construction. They seemed to be made of the same material as the void between stars, shot through with veins of light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Then, suddenly, the music stopped. Not because they had stopped broadcasting, but because something else was broadcasting back. "Commander," Okafor's voice was filled with awe. "I'm receiving a response. They're playing the melody back to us, but they're harmonizing with it." The bridge filled with an ethereal harmony as the Void Wraith ships responded to their musical greeting. The alien melody wove around the human composition, creating something beautiful and entirely new. "It's working," Torres breathed. "They're actually talking to us." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes but kept her voice steady. "Okafor, can you modulate our response? Try to create a conversation." For the next hour, the Persistence and the Void Wraith fleet engaged in the strangest first contact in galactic history. Mathematics led to music. Music led to more complex patterns, and patterns led to something that could almost be called language. Gradually, images began to appear on their screens. Not threatening tactical displays, but something more like art. Star charts that showed not conquest but exploration. Images of worlds not consumed but studied. And finally, heartbreakingly, images of other ships, other civilizations, all of whom had approached with weapons raised and shields up. "Oh my God," Dr. Reyes whispered from where she had joined them on the bridge. They weren't attacking the ships, they were trying to communicate. Sarah nodded, understanding flooding through her. And when the ships responded with hostility, they defended themselves, but they never learned how to explain what they wanted. The images continued, telling a story of a species born in the void between stars, naturally existing in a state between matter and energy. They had been exploring the galaxy for millennia, trying to understand the solid beings who built ships and cities, but every encounter had ended in violence. "They're lonely," Okafor said softly. "They've been trying to make contact for thousands of years, and everyone keeps shooting at them." Sarah stepped closer to the screen, studying the flowing patterns of light that seemed to be the Void Wraith's method of communication. "Can you tell them we understand? That we want to be friends?" Okafor's fingers flew over her controls, translating Sarah's words into the mathematical and musical language they had developed. The response came immediately, a burst of light and sound that could only be interpreted as joy. Over the next several hours, a remarkable exchange took place. The Void Wraiths, who called themselves something that translated roughly as the Wanderers Between, shared their story. They were explorers and artists, beings of pure curiosity who wanted nothing more than to understand the universe and the strange solid creatures who inhabited it. The missing ships, it turned out, had not been destroyed. When faced with hostile responses to their communication attempts, the Wanderers had simply moved the ships to a safe dimension while they tried to figure out how to explain themselves. The crews were alive, confused but unharmed. "They can bring them back?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to believe it. The response was a wave of affirmative harmonies. Not only could they return the missing ships and crews, they wanted to. They had been holding on to them, hoping someday to find someone who would listen. As the Persistence prepared to escort the first group of returned vessels back to Council space, Sarah opened a channel to the Galactic Trade Council. Ambassador Zixathala's crystalline form appeared on the screen, her colors cycling through what Sarah had learned to recognize as extreme anxiety. "Commander Chen, we had given you up for lost. Your ship disappeared from our sensors 12 hours ago." "We're fine, Ambassador. More than fine. We need to arrange a meeting. A peaceful meeting. I think the Council is going to want to hear what I have to say." 2 weeks later, Sarah stood once again in the Great Assembly Hall, but this time, she wasn't alone. Floating beside her in a specially designed containment field was one of the Wanderers, its form shifting between shadow and light as it communicated through the translation matrix that Okafor had developed. The returned crews had corroborated her story, describing their time in the strange dimensional pocket as confusing but not frightening. The Wanderers had done everything they could to make them comfortable while trying to figure out how to return them safely. "The implications are staggering," Ambassador Zixthala was saying, her form bright with excitement. a species that exists between dimensions with technology that could revolutionize space travel, communication, even our understanding of physics itself. Captain Morgeth, his massive frame somehow looking humbled, approached Sarah. "Commander, I owe you an apology. When you spoke of communication instead of combat, I thought you naive. I was wrong." "We all were," Sarah replied. "We assumed that because they were different, they must be hostile. We never considered that they might be just as afraid of us as we were of them." The wanderer beside her pulsed with what the translation matrix interpreted as agreement. Through their musical language, it explained that they had encountered dozens of species over the millennia, but all had responded to their attempts at contact with violence. They had begun to believe that communication between their kind and the solid races was impossible. But humans, it continued through the translator, humans tried something different. Instead of assuming we were enemies, you assumed we might be friends. That small difference changed everything. Ambassador Quellis, her gaseous form shimmering with what Sarah had learned was her species' expression of awe, asked the question that was on everyone's mind. What happens now? How do we move forward? The answer came not from the wanderer, but from Sarah herself. We do what humans have always done best. We learn, we explore, we make friends with the impossible. She looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives of 47 different species, each unique, each bringing their own perspective to the galactic community. The universe is vast and full of wonders we can't even imagine. Today we learned that not every mystery is a threat, not every unknown is an enemy. Sometimes the most frightening thing in the dark is just someone trying to say hello. The wanderer pulsed with harmonious agreement, and for the first time in the Great Assembly Hall's history, the chamber filled with the sound of music. Not the formal protocols of diplomatic communication, but something far more basic and universal, the simple joy of making a new friend. As the session concluded and delegates began making plans for formal diplomatic relations with the wanderers, Morgeth approached Sarah one final time. "Commander," he said, his voice carrying a respect that had not been there before. "You were right about humans being good at talking to things that don't want to talk back. How did you know it would work?" Sarah smiled, looking out through the chamber's transparent walls at the stars beyond. "Because that's what we do. Humans have always been the species that looks at the impossible and says, let's try anyway. Sometimes that gets us into trouble, but sometimes it lets us make friends with beings made of starlight and shadow." She paused, watching as one of the Wanderer's ships gracefully moved past the station, its form shimmering between states of matter. "Besides," she added with a grin, "someone had to prove that the smallest ship can sometimes carry the biggest ideas." The Persistence had returned to regular cargo runs, but Sarah knew that nothing would ever be quite the same. Somewhere out in the void between stars, beings of pure curiosity were exploring the universe with renewed hope, knowing that they were no longer alone in their wonder. And in the trade routes that had once been no-go zones, human ships now traveled safely alongside vessels from dozens of species, all of them protected by guardians who existed between the stars and sang songs of friendship in the language of mathematics and music. It had taken just one human ship to change everything. But then again, Sarah mused as she watched the stars, that was exactly the kind of impossible thing that humans did best.